My next expedition will be an attempt to climb Mount Everest to raise money for Marie Curie Cancer Care. In 2005, my route to try to get to the top of Mount Everest was from the Tibetan side of the mountain, which is the side used in the 1920s by the early British attempts of Mallory and Irvine, who eventually died, having maybe got up to the top, maybe not. Nobody's yet discovered whether they were the first people or whether it was in the 1950s with Ed Hillary and Tenzing. So the northern side was the old British side, whereas the first ascent of Mount Everest was done from the Nepali side by Ed Hillary and Tenzing in the 1950s, and that is the side that I'm now going to try from. The reason we're going to try again from the Nepalese side, having failed by a very narrow head on the Tibetan side, is that there are two reasons for having failed, in my opinion. One is that with the cardiac problem that I have got, I should not go too fast. And all the way up to the point where I had the cardiac problem, which was 28,500 feet I had reached on the very last night before the summit, because I'd been moving very, very slowly, plodding along, keeping my heart rate below 130 beats a minute. Whereas on that very last night, I was frightened with the idea that the team leader had a turned back point along the summit ridge, and any of his 15 charges, I was just one of 15, who didn't make it to that point by a certain set time, he would not allow them to carry on towards the summit, but they would have to turn back without having reached the summit. Just too bad, because the timing up there is very, very worrying to the guides. So that was one reason, the fact that I went too fast to try and get to the turnaround point on time to avoid being turned back. And the other reason why I had the cardiac problem almost certainly was because on the Tibetan side you do have to spend a very long time in an advanced base camp where you wait in readiness for the weather becoming good so that you can have your bash at the top. And that advanced base camp is above 20,000 feet, so your body is actually rotting. It's doing damage to itself at that altitude where you shouldn't be. Humans shouldn't be at that altitude. So if you're sitting in the advanced base camp for weeks, in fact for a month, as I was, then your body has deteriorated. It's difficult to pin down quite how, but you're not on peak form at all when you do set out for the top bit. So by going to the Nepalese side, I hope to be with a team leader, but not with 15 others. So therefore, they're not going to knock out the slow sheep and only allow the greyhounds to get there. But also, the advanced base camps are much lower in a much more sensible position than they are in Tibet. So both those new factors should give me a chance to do it from the Nepalese side, which I couldn't from the Tibetan side. In 2005, I had a pet goal, which was to try and climb Everest before certain individuals could do so. Those certain individuals were, like me, the people who had crossed all Antarctica and all of the Arctic Ocean. And it's a big threesome, the Arctic, the Antarctic, and the tallest mountain in the world. Who could be the person to do all three? And I thought that maybe I could, but unfortunately I failed. However, it seems as though still nobody has done all three, and I'm still in with a faint chance, probably my last chance because of old age, to actually do all three if I can do Everest. So that in the back of my mind is something I would certainly like to do in 2008. On an expedition, you might well, from an egotistic point of view, succeed in doing the expedition. You might hopefully be the first people ever to do it, beating your rivals in Norway and France and so on. And that's great for the ego, but when all is said and done, that doesn't last very long. If one can say to oneself that you've actually raised big, and I mean big sums of money, we're talking £11 million so far on the expeditions for UK charities, then you can say to yourself, yeah, on that expedition I did raise 1.5 million or 2.5 million, or in one case 4.2 million from that expedition. It's a tangible benefit to people who are suffering if you choose your charity very well. So it is always a great help. And if the money being raised increases for the distance you get towards the pole or across Antarctica or whatever, if the further you go, the more money you raise, and you can quantify it, it's a very good thing to help you keep moving when you don't really want to. Prior to an Everest climb, it's important to keep relatively fit. It's important to get your climbing muscles, your thighs, accustomed to marching, probably with a relatively heavy pack on your back, up hills, up gradients. So at least twice a week I would do a 2-hour run with a lot of hill work in it. I would probably go out a month or two before the climb to do mountaineering, to get used to carrying an ice pick and crampons and so on. And I would eat rice or potato, any form of complex carbohydrate for at least 4 months before going out on this sort of expedition. Acclimatization is absolutely vital for anyone wanting to go up Mount Everest, however old or young or fit or unfit they may be. You have got to let the body acclimatize to ever higher points where you're going to be living and sleeping and moving. And climbers have evolved the best way of doing this, which is by going up a certain amount, then going down again and sleeping down, then the next day going up a little bit higher, and then coming down again. It's pretty exhausting, lots and lots of work, but if you don't do it, bits of your body will be overcome by the pressure of high altitude, pulmonary edema, cerebral edema, the blood vessels behind your retinas bursting, all sorts of things can happen if you go too high too quickly. I do give lectures to conferences. The thing is, it's all very well lecturing to other people, but you have to be able to lecture to yourself, because on an expedition, when you get crutch rot, you get gangrene in your feet, you've got hundreds of miles to trudge ahead, every day is painful, every night in the tent, swollen feet ache like hell, frostbite and so on, you begin to wish that you could stop and not go on anymore on this dreadful, painful 12 hours a day, and then the pain at night. So the temptation, the wimpish voice in your head telling you to stop, gets very powerful indeed, and so you really do need to be able to combat it. Different people have different methods of fighting this weakness in their head. Some people use religion, which works very well, I know. Personally, I respect the memory of my grandfather and my father. I never met them, but I heard all about what they did, and they, to me, are most important, and I picture that they are there watching me on these expeditions, and I don't wish to do anything to let them down, and that helps enormously. In 2003, my wife, Ginny, of 36 years, died of cancer in an NHS cancer ward. And within 2 years, 2 of my 3 sisters and my mother also died, 2 of them of cancer. And I spent a lot of time in cancer wards, and in particular, the 3 months when my wife was dying in an NHS cancer ward, we, the 2 of us, would go from her bed to see the people, the ladies normally, in the other beds in the same ward, many of whom did not have visits from anybody. And we would go across and talk to them, and very often they would say to us that what they really would have much preferred would have been to be dying their last weeks and months in their own apartment, in their flat, in their house or whatever, with their pet dog, their pet cat, the photographs of their past lives. Memories would have taken the edge off the loneliness of being in a place where a ward, you see other people being visited, you might get a chance conversation with a busy nurse, but that's it. So it needs a lot of Marie Curie nurses to be able to let people die at home and have the choice of where they die. But there aren't enough Marie Curie nurses, and so that was why I believe it to be a very good cause, and certainly want to work to help it.